Welcome to this explainer. You know that incredible full-body sense of relief you get the exact second a canceled plan suddenly frees up your Friday night? Yeah, if you're nodding your head right now, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking a really empathetic, structured look at the hidden psychology behind why some of us just flat out prefer being alone.
Right off the bat, let's dive into this and ask a question that might honestly validate everything you've ever felt. What if your need for solitude isn't antisocial? What if craving a closed door isn't some sort of character flaw, but just a biological sign that your brain processes the world completely differently?
See, society absolutely loves to push this myth, this idea that preferring your own company means you're out of touch, or, disconnected from reality. But the psychological reality, it's a whole different story. Psychology actually shows us that a preference for solitude is a brilliant biological and emotional strategy. It's literally a built-in mechanism for navigating a world that, let's be honest, can be overwhelmingly loud and chaotic.
Okay, so let's look at the biological baseline here. High sensitivity.
The really crucial piece of the puzzle here is a concept known as the highly sensitive person, or HSP. For these individuals, their nervous systems process sensory and emotional information so much more deeply. It's kind of like having the volume knob on life permanently cranked to 11. Everyday stuff, walking into a crowded room, navigating a super busy conversation, feels intensely magnified. And because their brains are working overtime processing all this extra data, they hit that wall of mental exhaustion much faster than everyone else.
Now look at this stark contrast in how different brains recover from basic social stimulation. People with low sensitivity, they can brush off a loud environment and bounce back in no time. But for high sensitivity folks, actually think of it like an older smartphone trying to run a really heavy app. The battery just drains at a completely different rate. The world simply demands a massive amount of cognitive effort from them on a daily basis.
And that brings us to this point. Quiet time is a psychological necessity to restore mental energy. It's not just a casual preference or a nice to have. It is absolutely crucial. They physically and mentally require this solitude to literally plug back into the wall and recharge. Without it, they just can't function or feel like themselves.
So, how does this play out day to day? Let's talk about the economics of mental energy.
There is this brilliant quote from the psychological research that hits the nail on the head. Attention is a limited resource. Think about how profound that actually is. Every single conversation you have, every text you reply to, every social obligation, it all costs mental currency. And because they are so deeply aware that this resource is finite, people who love their solitude are incredibly, fiercely selective with how they spend it.
Just look at how this energy allocation breaks down. They are actively protecting their peace. You've got a massive 85% dedicated to internal reflection and a few truly meaningful projects or tight-knit relationships. That leaves just 15% for broader social interactions. They are choosing depth over breadth every single time. Instead of spreading themselves paper thin, trying to be available to the whole world, they hoard that focus for the stuff that genuinely matters.
Ultimately, this means they aren't running away from society at all. They're running toward a far more intentional life.
And this perfectly sets up our next point: the power of the internal life.
This intentional way of living completely rewires how a person experiences fulfillment. For a lot of society, external approval, getting public recognition, or racking up those digital likes is what triggers the brain's reward system. But for those who value solitude, it's all about internal validation. They get their fulfillment from the experience itself. They genuinely know that a beautiful, meaningful moment doesn't require an audience or witnesses to make it real.
Which perfectly explains this next insight. People who value solitude spend way more time thinking than explaining. Since they don't have this burning need to broadcast their every move, a really fascinating behavioral shift happens. Instead of exhausting themselves trying to justify their choices to a broad audience, they just turn inward. All that processing happens quietly, completely on their own time.
And this internal process follows a pretty reliable rhythm. Step 1, they process major life changes internally. Step 2, they sit back and reflect deeply on the possibilities and consequences. And finally, step 3, they take action. But they do it with a remarkably strong internal sense of direction. Because they rely on this internal compass, they aren't looking around for a green light from anyone else. It makes them incredibly resilient, even if they're totally misunderstood by the people around them.
Moving right along, let's look at privacy as emotional control. Maintaining strict privacy isn't about hiding. It's a brilliant, proactive tool for emotional regulation. The benefits are huge. First, it gives you immense comfort and total control over your own environment. Second, it lets you dictate exactly who gets VIP access to the details of your life. And maybe the biggest win of all? It acts as an absolute shield against the psychological drain of social comparison. No more exhausting yourself trying to keep up with everyone else.
So putting it all together, we're really talking about embracing true psychological needs.
We have got to throw out the myth that preferring your own company means you're lonely or antisocial. The reality, you just have different emotional needs. You simply have a different but completely 100% equally valid way of connecting with the world around you.
I want to share this quote because it really wraps up our findings perfectly. Life often feels richer when it is lived and reflected upon deeply, rather than performed for others. Isn't that powerful? When you finally stop performing for the crowd, you stop draining your battery on the shallow stuff. You instantly create the space and the energy to experience a life that is so much richer and way more authentic.
Understanding your own mind is never about forcing yourself into a mold that just doesn't fit. So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. Why do you experience the world so differently? And what incredible things could you actually achieve if, instead of fighting it, you finally embraced the quiet power of how your brain naturally works? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the fascinating psychology of how you live.